Good evening, everybody. My name is Stuart Singleton-White. I'm Head of Campaigns at the Angling Trust, and I'd like to welcome you all to this, our 7th Angling Trust Virtual Sea Angling Forum of 2022. It's an absolute pleasure to be joined this evening by the Marine Management Organisation, and in particular by Jessica Duffil-Telsnig and Rachel Thurwell from the MMO, who are going to talk to us this evening about the Channel Demersal non-quota species fisheries management plan. So you don't want to hear from me, you want to hear from both Jessica and Rachel. So I'm going to quickly mention how the evening's going to run, and then I'm going to hand over to Jessica and Rachel. So as has been the case on all the sea angling forums, I have with me tonight Nevin Hunter, who is doing the technical work in the background, and Hannah Rudd, who will be managing and curating the questions. Now, it's slightly different tonight from those of you who have been on these sea angling forums before, in that we're going to get a short presentation from Jessica and Rachel, but then they have a series of structured questions they would like to ask and discuss. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't also ask questions, and it's the usual format. You put them in the chat for us, and we will try and deal with them after we've dealt with Jessica and Rachel's structured questions. But we've only got an hour this evening, so there's a good possibility we won't get a chance to deal with them all, and I apologise for that. But both Jessica and Rachel have committed to answering those questions by email after the event if we don't get round to them. So thank you, Jessica and Rachel, for doing that. I think the only other thing I think to mention is that we are recording this session, as we do with all the sessions, and we will be posting that onto the website within the next week or so. So if anybody you know who's missed it and wants to catch up, please do direct them to our website, and we will be emailing you the link to that once it's posted. So that's enough from me, because we're short of time. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to Jessica and Rachel. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, and good evening, everyone. Thanks for attending and really taking time out of your evening. We really do appreciate it. We'd also like to thank the Angling Trust for setting this up for us, and also obviously advertising it to all of its members. So really thanks a lot to them as well. So just as an introduction, I'm Jessica Duffil-Telsnig, and I'm a Principal Fisheries Manager within the Marine Management Organisation, or MMO, and I'm working on the Channel Demersal non-quota species FMP. And I'm here with my colleague Rachel Thurwell, who is a Fisheries Manager in MMO, also working on the Channel FMP. So today, what we'd like to talk to you about is really an introduction for who is the MMO and what our role is in developing FMPs, what actually is an FMP, and specifically as well looking at the Channel Demersal non-quota species FMP, and then really hopefully focusing a lot on gathering what your views are on species you want to see prioritised, what any of your concerns are with these species, and how you want to be engaged and involved in this FMP. With the brief presentation that I'm going to do, we are going to bring it back to basics, so apologies if you already know the information, but we thought it'd be better to kind of start from scratch and then kind of build it from there to make sure we're not missing out any key information. And then we'll finish with a question and answer session. So if you want to put your questions in the chat, then we can get to them at the end. Or if you want to also raise your hand, and I think Hannah can unmute you in the end as well, and you can ask them as well. So just to begin with, we'll go right back to the beginning of who are the MMO. So we are an executive non-departmental public body in the UK. We were established under the Marine and Coastal Access Act in 2019, and we have responsibility for English waters in particular. So the MMO's purpose is to protect and enhance the marine environment and to support sustainable marine activities and development. And this includes fishing activities across the English seas, and in particular from kind of 6 nautical miles out, because we've got the inshore fisheries and conservation authorities who look after the 0 to 6 nautical mile area. So what actually are fisheries management plans? So they are a new way of kind of managing fisheries. Now the UK has left the EU, and the requirement for government to develop these FMPs are written into the Fisheries Act. And the joint fishery statement goes into more detail about what FMPs actually are and what they should contain. But these together show how we should be able to achieve fisheries objectives, which are outlined in the Fisheries Act. For example, one of the objectives are having sustainable fisheries. And they're a new way of looking at how we can manage fisheries and looking at a plan-led approach to fisheries management. So an FMP is a document that sets out policies which are designed to restore or maintain one or more stocks of sea fish to sustainable levels. And in the legislation, it's outlined what an FMP needs to do, and that includes looking at the which stock is specified. So it might be either one stock or it could be multiple stocks, and the geographic area. So it might be, for example, national, so across all UK waters, or it might focus on a particular region. Look at the plan's goals and objectives. So what is it going to achieve? Look at the available evidence and steps which are needed to assess the status of the stocks. So are they in a kind of more sustainable manner, or actually do they need to be recovered to a certain extent? Then it can identify different kind of governance policies or management measures which might be needed to make the stocks sustainable. Then also look at how it's going to be measured to make sure that it's successful, and be monitored for the plan's effectiveness. And then also to understand when the plan's going to be reviewed. And with FMPs, the aim is that they're going to be a new way of working with kind of transparency and collaboration, working with stakeholders to develop evidence-based plans. And once an FMP is published, the work kind of doesn't stop there. Any relevant national fisheries authorities, so that might be, for example, MMO in English waters, or it might be Marine Scotland in Scottish waters, will then enforce any management measures which the FMP outlines as required. And then also each FMP will be reviewed at least every 6 years, potentially sooner, to make sure that they remain effective. So in total, there are 43 FMPs which are outlined in the joint fishery statement, and these cover a variety of stocks and different geographic areas across the UK. And the joint fishery statement, or JFS, sets out all of the different FMPs that are being planned currently, and also what the timelines are for when they're planned to be published. And different bodies are leading on the FMPs, with DEFRA coordinating. So for example, there are 12 FMPs which focus on English waters only, which are being led and coordinated by DEFRA, or the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. So for these 12 FMPs, DEFRA has decided to focus on 6 to begin with, and called these front runners. And these front runners allow us to prioritise some stocks, because we can't do all the FMPs to begin with at once. DEFRA, although they're responsible for the ultimate preparation and publication of the FMPs, they've actually handed out these front runners to different delivery partners to produce draft FMPs and to lead on stakeholder engagement, which allows there to be different methods and engagement tested, and we can learn basically how then compare notes and work out best practices from this going forward. So plans will be developed considering available evidence, and then priority issues will be addressed first, and further iterations of the plans can then take into account future issues and more evidence as it's gathered. And front-runner FMPs are also going to be engaging relevant stakeholders throughout their development. So here's just a table showing the 6 different front-runner FMPs, and it looks at the different stocks that are covered and the delivery partners and the publication dates. So for example, we've got crab and lobster, whelk, scallops, bass, Channel non-quoted demersal FMP, which we're talking about at the moment, and then the Southern North Sea and Eastern Channel mixed flatfish FMP. And you can see that the delivery partners, some are Seafish, then there's also the Scallop Industry Consultation Group, DEFRA and Policy Lab, and us leading on the channel. So you might have already joined, or you might be able to catch that actually the Bass FMP Policy Lab gave a similar talk at this one of these forums. So if you've missed that, you can go to the Angling Trust website to catch their recording of what they discussed. So just to focus in on the channel demersal non-quota species FMP in particular, as you saw from the table, we are leading on it. And this covers ICES areas 7D and 7E. So on the map here, it's really across the whole of the English Channel, right from kind of Kent out to Cornwall area. It covers demersal species, which are species which live near or on the seabed, and also are non-quota species or NQS, so species which don't have commercial catch limits. And we'll go through all the species which we're considering on the next slide. So this plan was chosen as thought to be an important plan because of potential overexploitation of some stocks, and also generally a lack of data for lots of the NQS stocks. So we are leading on talking to interested stakeholders to gain a full picture of the demersal NQS species. And we'll be gathering evidence from various sources and using this to help steer our development and what we include in the FMP. So we're looking to have regular engagement with stakeholders throughout the development as well. So this, I would add, is kind of just an initial engagement, and we're hoping to come back and keep talking to people as we kind of develop the FMP. So here we've got all the species which we're considering. So red tub and grey gurnard, we've got cuttlefish, bib, octopus, John Dory, red mullet, lemon sole, lesser spotted dogfish, brill, squid, turbot, and smoothhound. And some of these species, such as lemon sole, bib, turbot, brill, and smoothhound, aren't in the current draft of the joint fisheries statement, but we actually decided to include them in the FMP because from our research and kind of initial findings from talking with the commercial industry. So this is not necessarily a final list, but please also let us know. So if you think that you know these species as a different common name, for example, we know that red mullet can also be called surmullet. So yeah, please do let us know if you think that this might be another common name that you might refer these species as. So as you can see, there's lots of species to look at, and so we might choose to focus on some key species during this first iteration of the FMP, and include looking at evidence for some of the other species in later years. And so this is really part of the reason why we really want to get your views and understand which species you think are important and we should prioritise for this iteration. So just for a bit of an understanding of the timeline, so this summer we are really just starting off and holding initial stakeholder engagements with commercial and recreational fishers and other interested stakeholders as well. And this is just to get an initial understanding of what people want from the FMP and how they want to be involved. We'll then use this feedback to develop our plans for how to kind of develop the FMP and draft it. And we'll use it to develop plans such as a stakeholder engagement plan and an evidence plan. So from there, we kind of move into the preparation phase, where we'll actually be looking to develop and draft the FMP itself, and also an evidence statement which accompanies it and just looks at all the current evidence we know and the evidence gaps, and potentially how we're going to fill those evidence gaps in the future. We won't go quiet though for a year whilst we're planning on preparing this document, and we still want to hold regular engagement to kind of keep checking in with people to see if we've got the understanding correct and also gather more evidence if possible from the relevant stakeholders. Then in summer 2023, we're aiming to hold a formal consultation on our draft FMP and evidence statements. And then from that, we'll again take people's feedback to incorporate into the final FMP, which aims to be published by the end of 2023. So that's really just a whistle-stop tour of a brief context of everything. So before we move on to asking some questions for you, I don't know if anyone has any particular questions that they want clarifying. I can see there's nothing in the chat, so I would assume that maybe people have hopefully understood the presentation, but I'll just pause briefly before handing over to Rachel in case anyone has any quick questions that they want answering from the presentation that I gave.
Thanks, Jessica. Great presentation. And just like to invite anyone in the audience who may like to raise their hand. We can offer you the floor if there's any questions at this stage that you'd like further clarification on, as Jessica said, or alternatively, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. I can see Tony Hills has his hand up, so I will just give you audio and camera permissions. If you'd like to unmute yourself, Tony, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hannah. It's an interesting presentation in one way, that the type of species are a complete mix from midwater, ground loving species and wreck loving species. So some of those you wouldn't catch commercially, like John Dory, very easily, if they're inhabiting over a wreck, because you'd lose too much gear, unless you're doing it, should we say, from an angling boat. But on other species, like you call them bib, I would call them pouting, same thing. And they're a pest to us in the Eastern Channel. But you have there alongside species like smoothhound, which are getting more and more important for starry and common smoothhounds. Our main summer fish now, I'd say, in my neck of the woods, near Dungeness, and bass. That's our two main species in the summer. So I'm interested in how you chose those species.
Thanks. So the species were chosen by, it's actually not the MMO who chose the initial species, which are in the joint fishery statements. And I think they were looked at through a variety of ways of just understanding, for example, like the economic and the importance of them, our current understanding of evidence, and from that kind of cobbled together a list of species. And like I said, we've then included a few more, for example, like Demersal and Brill and Turbot and Smoothhound, from kind of our understanding, our research that we've currently conducted. And we'll move on a second to ask you what you think is important for you from a species perspective. So it'll be really interesting to get your feedback. But that's the really brief understanding of why those species were chosen.
If I could just come in there, Jessica,
yeah.
because some of the species are worth absolutely nothing. They're not even worth pot bait. And other species, like a turbot, is worth shed loads of money, you know, £200 to a vessel, a good sized turbot. So they've got tremendously big range of values. How's that work?
I think it's also understanding that maybe some species we don't have a lot of data or understanding of. So it's also, maybe potentially we want to gather more evidence to understand further, even if it's maybe not got a lot of commercial value, it might be seen as important from a kind of stock perspective, or potentially might be considered that we maybe don't know if it's being overfished, and we just want to get that better understanding of what's actually happening with these species stocks. So it's not necessarily all the kind of really commercially important species, but also just getting a better understanding of some of the data poor species.
I've got the drift now, so but thanks for explaining it to me. Thank you.
No problem. I'll pass over to Rachel then to hopefully ask you some questions. Oh, we've just got Andy.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. And do you mind, Jess, if we just hand over to Andy quickly? Is that okay? Great, thanks. Bear with me a minute, Andy. I'll just allow your microphone. If you'd like to unmute yourself, the floor is now yours.
Okay, I'll apologise if my microphone doesn't work very well. I'm just wondering how you intend to benchmark all these species that you've never ever benchmarked before, especially when you consider that quota species and bass, that the evidence is not considered very good for the management already. It seems to me that you might be benchmarking dodos in a lot of cases.
Hopefully they won't become extinct, if that's kind of the drift again. But I think it's even starting to understand what's happening with stocks and starting to gather that evidence, but also then potentially put evidence or kind of research plans in place, so in the future we can start to gather more and better evidence to understand those stocks. So potentially we are kind of starting from ground zero with some of these species, but then it's setting out what the evidence is. We do know what are the evidence gaps, and then putting forward kind of a research plan for how we're going to gather that evidence in order to understand more. So it's not necessarily saying we know everything, particularly compared with some other species like quota species. We won't be able to understand or put in place, for example, management measures straight away. We're just potentially going to be understanding what is the stock doing, and in the future then can we better understand it and understand if we need to put any management measures in place.
Yeah, I think the evidence shows in fisheries that if you don't take action early, the stocks fall through the floor. The evidence is quite clear to see in the fisheries. So you're supposed to take a precautionary approach.
Yeah.
So therefore, should you not be saying, right, we need to really stop exploitation on a lot of these species, and then gather evidence as to what they are doing, rather than just say we'll carry on as we are now and risk a catastrophic collapse in stock.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a balance. We don't necessarily want to stop all fishing, because that's not going to be helpful either. So it really is a balance. And I think that's through understanding kind of what is the evidence that we've got so far telling us about these species. And from there, what will we be looking to do? So does it make sense to put any management measures in place? What will the effects of those management measures? Because we don't want to put something in place that actually isn't going to benefit the species or kind of the people fishing it as well.
I think that you've got to be careful when you say the people that are fishing the fishery, because when the stock does collapse, then they'll go looking for something else, and then that'll eventually collapse. Surely, if you stop any targeted fisheries, you're never going to stop fishing. We're not saying don't fish, but if you stop targeted fisheries on these fisheries until you gather some evidence, surely that will be the best way forward.
Yeah, it's something we can definitely consider, and I think will be driven by the evidence of what we're going to do. But I think if possible, we'll move on just to Rachel's questions, and then we'll come back to all of your questions just to make sure we don't run out of time.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Yep, so thanks everyone for your questions so far. And as Jess said, we'll have another question and answer session at the end. But this is just a chance for us to ask you the questions and gather the information that we want from you today. So the first question, and please feel free to write the answers to this in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand and have a bit more of a discussion about it with us, that's also okay. So yeah, the first question is just which species off this list and the ones that Jess has already spoken to you about do you think that we should be prioritising? And also, if you can just write a little bit about why you think we should be prioritising these species, that would be great. So I'll just give you a minute or two if anybody wants to write the answer to that one in the chat, or like I said, you can pop your hand up and have a bit more of a discussion about it if you want to.
Anna, I think someone has raised their hand. I'm not sure who.
Excellent, thank you. I think John May has got his hand up. Would you like to unmute yourself, John?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear, John.
Hello, I've missed the first couple of minutes, but I've got two questions. Is overall, did you show earlier on the area that you're looking at? How far out to sea, and is it all around the coast?
Yes, so it's the English Channel specifically, and it's for UK waters, and it's really right along the English Channel from kind of Kent coast right round to Cornwall.
And how many miles is that? Is that the entire channel right the way across, or 6 miles or 12 miles?
I think it depends on really where the economic zone ends, but it's from kind of zero from the coastline out to where our kind of waters end at the end of the economic zone. So I'm not sure exactly how much that, because I think that obviously fluctuates depending where France kind of hits, but it's that kind of UK waters.
Okay, well that's fair enough. The other thing, are you going to be looking at minimum sizes, closed seasons, and spatial closures in the management?
Potentially, I think we're really at the very beginning. So first of all, we want to understand obviously what the evidence is for different species, and from there potentially look at if management measures are needed, what so. But we're really, yes, potentially, but we don't know what yet or how or for which species because we're really right at the beginning.
That's right, because obviously the basic start is to protect the fish until they get to a larger size and can breed.
Yeah.
So many of the sizes that are professionally used and recreationally used is too small. The fish are not allowed to breed, so that's a basic stock control.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, John. Tony, I'm going to unmute yourself again because I can see you've got your hand up. I'm hoping this is in relation to what Rachel's question is. If not, can we leave it towards the end just in terms of time? But please feel free to unmute yourself now, Tony.
You can always mute me, Hannah. You got my permission. No, it's interesting. It's interesting the species you've got, but one in the chat it was mentioned about place. And that's a very important species. It's an indicator species in my neck of the woods. Because I'm involved in recreational angling, commercial angling, and I'm a member of the Kent SSIFCA, and I do the environment for Kent. So I've got a lot of stuff going on, but place is a good indicator species. Some of these species have no value, and there's no intention of. They're almost a bycatch. I mean, for example, dogfish. But I would add place to that list. But what's driving your list is interesting because some of those species are incredibly expensive and worth fishing for, and others aren't. And the reason, if they haven't got a quota, which I assume your species haven't got quotas here, is because they haven't really had enough of them to make it worthwhile. Except I would look at smoothhound. You have to be very careful with smoothhound. A lot of these species that breed quite slowly can be easily overfished commercially. And that's the one that would ring alarm bells with me. The rest are quite hard to catch, some of those. So the commercials can't get their sticky fingers on them. But that's what I would say. But if that's any help, I don't know. Thanks, Anna.
No, that's great. Thank you, Tony. Was there anyone else with a hand up?
I don't think I can see anyone else with my hand up, but there's been quite a few messages in the chat. Most of them agreeing with previous comments in the sense that the priority really should be about minimum sizes and breeding sizes to ensure that those populations are sustained. So we will pass over any comments that are in the chat to Rachel and Jess at the end. So your views will be considered. But I think we're free to move on to the next question.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So yeah, we've already spoken about this slightly, but are there any of the species that we didn't list there that you really think need to be included? So again, feel free to write any of these species in the chat, or if you want to pop your hand up again. But this is just a chance for us to see if we've missed anything that's really important to the recreational fishing industry that maybe we've not picked up in other stakeholder engagements so far.
Okay, great. We have some hands up. John May, I have you first. If you'd like to unmute yourself, please go ahead with your question.
Sorry about that. A quick answer on species is the cod.
Yeah, so I think
I don't think
that's not covered. Yeah, that won't be covered within the remit of this FMP.
Yeah, I think cod has its
because
own
it's
FMP.
Yeah, fine. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. I'm assuming, Andy, your question was just answered since your hand's been lowered. Oh, and now it's gone back up again. No worries. If you'd like to unmute yourself, Andy, floor is yours.
Yeah, that wasn't actually my question, but I thought that if I do have the question, it might be prudent to bring that question up later in the presentation or some other time. So I thought I'd just lower my hand.
Yep, that's
Okay.
fine. I can see a few more things coming in the chat. So we've got play crabs, taupe, flounders, and pot baits. Yeah, is there any other species, demersal species, that people want to bring up, or do you think they've all been covered?
I think most seem to have been covered now. Lots of focus on elasmobranchs, and yeah, flounder, taupe, flatfish in general. So yeah, I think we're good to move on. But please keep things coming in the chat if we've missed them.
Yep, so the next question is just we want to gather a bit more information on what your concerns are with these species. So the ones that maybe you've mentioned in the chat or the ones that we've mentioned on the slides previously. Do you have concerns with like the stocks, the number of fish that you're catching, where you're seeing the fish, or different things like that?
Tony, the floor is yours. If you can unmute yourself, your microphone is already enabled.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. And if I go on too long, just cut me off. The problem I have is we had a very good meeting, Angling Trust, with some of the chief officers of the IFCAs, and it was apparent to me that climate change was the main driver. A half a degree rise in sea temperature makes a hell of a difference to what food is available to certain species. And if the food moves north, the fish move north, i.e. cod. Not everything, but the majority. So basically, I've got three concerns. One is climate change. How are you feeding that into your things? I have a big concern with marine wind farms, which I've seen evidence that the magnetic resistance fields creates changes in shellfish and therefore creates changes in the food sources and can become deserts. And the third one, and it's sort of my biggest one, is the super tankers that can strip out a whole population, a subpopulation of species in demersal terms, just gone. Pelagic fish is just gone. And that is the food source for a lot of other species down that food chain. So there you go. That's my 3 points anyway. Thanks, Hannah.
Thanks, Tony.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. That's really helpful to know.
Yeah, we've had some comments in the chat as well from Stuart around climate change. Just to, I suppose that's a nice segue to ask a quick question. Will these FMPs be holistic in the sense that will consider the other population pressures as well as fishing activity, or will they only be focused on controlling fishing activity and making allowances for that?
I think the main activity or focus will be on fishing pressure, but it will be kind of in the evidence statement, which will accompany it will look at things like climate change and potentially other anthropogenic pressures. So I think in the Fisheries Act, there is kind of an ecosystem objective, so looking at things holistically. So there is that kind of opportunity in the Fisheries Act to then look into that in more detail and understand holistically what's happening. But it's then potentially down to the individual FMPs to kind of interpret which objective and how much of that objective they kind of want to take forward. So yes, to a certain extent, but maybe depends on the individual FMP itself.
Okay, great. No, that's just really useful to know, because obviously climate change predictions are that certain stocks will move, so they might shift from one FMP area to another, and yeah, just wondering how flexible you guys were going to be on shifting those management priorities, but very useful to know. Thank you.
Great. So if nobody else has anything else for this question, I think we can. Oh, someone's just put their hand up.
Yeah, no worries. Nick, lovely to see you again. The floor is yours if you want to unmute yourself.
Appreciate it, Hannah. Also, I suppose leading on what you've just been going on in regard to moving species, shifting in relation to water temperatures, global warming, inevitably. In the same light, we also need to look at what's going to be coming into our waters. The tuna, let's say, are here, and we're battling at the moment trying to get our heads around that in a way that we can acknowledge people can actually fish for them. But maybe we could prepare ourselves somewhat, knowing that, I mean, it's 80 years or something that we're going to have this warm current come on for. We're at the start of it at the minute. So we're going to have a long period of fish moving over from Spanish waters, from more the Mediterranean side. They're going to be coming up with the warmer water. Could we possibly look at somehow predicting or allowing that some of those species become quota? You know, it's almost cutting our feet off before we get to run if we don't somehow prioritize what could be coming instead of having to try and catch up afterwards.
Yes, I don't know if you want to come in on that one.
Yep, great. No, that's an interesting point. And I think something we'll definitely think about, I guess it's again looking at the ecosystem objective and just understanding what's coming in and from a climate change perspective. So yeah, definitely something we can look into and go from there.
I mean, if you'd like some ideas on what could be coming, we could possibly do that. If you are after that.
Potentially, I think because we're right at the beginning, I think it's definitely something we can look into and then go from there. I think we'll be looking at it from kind of a climate change perspective, understanding, you know, introduction of species and things like that. You know, are the prey sources then going to be moving? Are they then potentially going to be eating different things in order to make up for that, or are they going to move themselves? So I know that there's a lot of scientific work happening on that at the moment, and definitely something that we'll need to kind of consider as part of that ecosystem approach.
I appreciate that. We've only last week I was out on the North Coast, and for the very first time, and I was with commercial fishermen at the time, and we saw series skipping across the top of the water, and we both turned to each other and we thought tuna was about to come out, but they actually bass behind them. But he confirmed, and I asked at the same time, and I said, I'll tell you something, it is the very first time I've seen even one of them on the North Coast. And he said, I've never ever in my life seen one of those on the North Coast. We see them on the south and they've been getting hammered. but they've moved around, and it's actually happening a lot quicker than I think we're acknowledging. It's only the fishermen that are really getting to see this. So that's why I'm saying possibly if we could help, we could alert you to some of this.
Thanks, Nick. Just in the interest of time, I think, how many more questions are there, Jess? Sorry, just so I can know from a time management perspective.
I think there's another couple, maybe 3 or 4.
Yeah.
Cool, excellent. Well, I'll hand back over to you, Rachel. We've got sort of 20 minutes left of the forum.
Yep, no, that's fine. So Jess, if you can go to the next question. So this is the next few questions are just more about how you want to be engaged with the FMP and how we can keep you updated. So this question is about how you want to be involved in the development of the fisheries management plan. So again, if you just let us know, and we've put up examples there. So do you want to be just updated on progress? Do you want us to consult with you on the FMP? Do you want to be involved in regular meetings? This is really for you to tell us how involved you want to be in the process. I see Tony's got his hand up.
Yep. Tony, you already have microphone privileges, so please feel free to unmute yourself.
Thanks.
And off you go.
You've been very patient with me, Hannah. All I can say is that transparency, spread the love, spread the information. We're working as a team, and that's important. Don't cherry pick bits out from, but I'm not sure you would, of course. But work with the IFCAs as well, because though it's an arbitrary line, 0 to 6 miles out, they have vessels and they get around possibly a bit more than you do at MMO. So you should work more as a team. And I would say that as an IFCA member, but I think it's important because it's fast, as one of our members just said, it's very fast moving. Sea level rise, temperature rise is far faster than my friends at the Met Office thought was going to happen. And that is a worry. So I think the fish will always follow the food. We've got bluefin in the channel. We've got bluefin, I would think, in the North Sea by now, following the food. My son's a charter skipper with the chart scheme, and he had 31 tuna last year. Unbelievable. There's so many out there. And those sort of things, we don't want to hurt them, take them or kill them, but it's really a case of us monitoring and respond to what's going on and share that information as far and as wide as you can. It's important to everybody from commercial to recreational.
Yep, no, that's great. We are working closely with the IFCAs, with our FMP as well, and the officers that they have locally. So we are working very closely with them. Does anybody else have anything they want to say about how involved they want to be with the development? Do you want us to have regular meetings with you, or send out regular updates?
So we've had a comment in from Nick, who says consulting monthly or bi-monthly would be great, as we might bring new info to attention. I certainly think from our very obviously the FMP development process is very new, but from our experience with bass, for example, I'd agree with Tony that transparency is very key. Language is very important as well. I think making sure that the recreational sea angling community know that they're involved and are a stakeholder is very important. Sometimes a lot of the communication just refers to the industry, which doesn't necessarily imply recreational sea angling. So I think from our perspective at the Angling Trust, that would be really fantastic, as well as ongoing engagement as we're having here. But sorry, I just hopped in there.
No, that's great. I mean, obviously this forum is just the start of the engagement that we want to have with the Angling Trust and recreational fishers. So this is why we're doing this, to just see how much you want to be involved and how we can best engage with you. And if you do have any comments on the presentation we've given or how we've given it, we'd really welcome those as well, so that we can tailor it and make it a bit more accessible to you guys. Mm-hmm. So we can move on to the next question if you want to. So this is just asking how it's best to engage with you, because when different people like to be engaged in different ways. So again, if you can just let us know whether you'd prefer us to put out updates on social media, whether you'd prefer us to do maybe some more of these forums, whether you'd want to be added to our emailing list, whether you want to do some in-person meetings or some more virtual meetings that have got more of a specific focus. or whether there's newsletters that you are signed up to that you think that we could utilise. Yeah, it'd be really interesting just to see each one of those you think would be the best way to get information out to you and also to engage with you about what we're doing with the FMP. I can see Ian's put Angling Trust Forums and email. We will be putting the email, our FMP email at the end of this slide, and people can email us there and sign up to be on our mailing list, and that's where we'll send out regular updates and things like that.
Tony
just
just put all methods. So
yeah.
I think we're also aware we don't want to obviously necessarily bombard people, and they're aware, you know, this is kind of one small part of people's day or kind of interest. So trying to strike that balance as well as is important for us. So that's why we're trying to see what works best for you and hopefully not overwhelm you.
Yeah, because I mean, we put out quite a few things on social media, so it's whether you use social media to keep up to date with them, like whether you follow the MMO on social media and things like that. Because if you don't, then that's probably not the best way to reach you with the information. So yeah, anything like that is helpful to know. I can see there we've got someone saying they don't use social media, so that's good. Tony says he doesn't mind being bombarded, so you might regret saying that afterwards. But no, that's some great stuff. Thank you so much for your answers there. You can continue to write in there if you want to, but I'll move on to the next question just because we're running a bit low on time. So this is just a question to ask you whether you think there are any other forums or if there's any events that are coming up that you think that we could utilise to engage with more sea anglers and recreational fishers. Tony, you've got your hand up again. I think you should be able to just unmute.
Yep, Tony, you can just unmute yourself.
Sorry about this. Yeah, forums are great. I've had a blog site on fishing since 2011, and my blog site's had so far just over 8 million views.
Oh wow!
Because I put catch reports on it. That's what gets people interested. A lot of armchair anglers who don't go anymore, who just look at the catch reports. So there's lots of, on Facebook, there's a Southeastern Fishing Forum, there's a whole pile of them. And I think they're quite good ways of reaching people as well. In my humble opinion, it's only my opinion, so don't start shouting at me, everybody. I think sea fishing has been in decline now since the cod went. Not just that, COVID, social changes and everything else. In my neck of the woods, it's no longer a winter fishery, it's now a summer fishery. It's no longer an overnight fishery, it's now a 3-hour fishery. And society and social change is happening, whether we like it or not. Link that to climate change and all the other things going on. We are going through a rapid development. So to reach anglers is not easy. The Angling Trust does a great job, but it's limited because the clubs are folding. They haven't got people to run them because everybody wants to get paid nowadays. No one wants to do it for free. My club's gone down from 5,000 members, because it was very big, Dutch Angling Association, to about 500. And it's hard to, but you've got to use all these techniques to reach people. Angling Trust is the key one, I suppose, and the associated clubs like mine. But yes, go on the forums, because that's where they inhabit. That's where the anglers live. So to reach the ones you want to reach. And if anything comes out the woodwork to advise you, take it. I mean, try these things out. Not easy.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you, Tony.
Yeah, and those forums on, is it on like Facebook or something, or is it just like web pages and blogs and things like that?
Yeah, you get more variety nowadays. But mine on I got one on Facebook, which regularly gets 6,000 views when I put a report up. That's quite good. At my one's Seagull Fishing Tackle. But yeah, blogs as well. It's just a changing market. It's quite fluid, and it's hard to keep up with what's the fashions going. But I would say Facebook is the main one.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So if nobody's got anything else to say on any other events and forums that we could go use, we can just move on. Oh, Nick's got his hand up.
Yeah, I mean, there's some fairly well-known anglers that they get a hell of a lot more hits than the majority of us. People as, say, Henry Gilby, for example, they generally cover, although not necessarily ardent fishermen, it's a very wide base of quite keen fishermen. So it's quite a good introduction to them to get a look at some of these or get presented with some of these, because I don't think they would necessarily see a lot of that info, but they're certainly going to be well up for engaging. It's just a matter of they aren't necessarily as ardent a fishermen as some of us. They don't know all the forums, but they follow some of the bigger, more commercial approached fishermen, like Henry, let's say, who does lure fishing, but he gets a very big audience on that. People like that could be a good ally. Otherwise, I'd say coming through the Angling Trust and through to the regionals and through to the clubs, I think is a very intelligent way, because that way it's passed word of mouth around through the right people and in the right channels already. Those people then go out and take that to all their colleagues, really. So, and it also seems to work a little better, I think, when it comes to an official channel. If there's some people that put certain things up, they actually get sort of bombarded as if they don't know what they're talking about, and they might not know how to respond to some of those reactions as well. Just a thought.
No, thank you, Nick. That's really helpful to know, and thank you for giving us that contact as well. It's nice to know that there's someone who we can also reach out to get our messages across. So I think we can move on now. Just looking at the time, and I know some of you might have a few more questions that you want to ask us. So yeah, this is just another chance for you to ask us any questions that you have, maybe on the content of the presentation or on anything else that's come up, and we can try and answer them. And as we've said, if we can't answer anything today, we're more than happy to take this away offline and then get the answer back to you by email. So yeah, just pop your questions in the chat or pop your hand back up.
While we're just waiting for people to put their hands up and populate the chat with some more questions, obviously, firstly, thank you for your time this evening to provide this presentation. But I also just wanted to highlight Andy's comment in the chat where he talks about the fact that many of these species are commercially important, so they have an economic value associated with them. But it's obviously important also to recognise that, for example, catch and release sea angling, and also the catch and keep angling as well, the kind of the value of keeping that fish and taking it home to feed yourself and your family is equally important. So you know, it has a different value perhaps than you know, direct expenditure, but it doesn't have you know, it still has a value, whether that's, you know, socioeconomically. So that's important to consider, I think.
No, definitely. And if there are any species, like you've mentioned, that are important to anglers in that way, then please do let us know. You know, we had the first question that was asking what species are important to you. It doesn't have to be the ones that we've just listed on there. But I'll just reiterate that it is the non-quota species demersal fisheries management plan that we are looking at. Pelagic species, like Andy's mentioned there, they're covered by different fisheries management plans. So I'm not sure how they are going to be engaging with the recreational anglers, but I'm sure that they might be doing similar forums with you guys. So yeah, just to reiterate, this is the demersal fisheries management plan, so we don't cover the pelagic species in it.
Thanks, Rachel. Over to you, Tony, for some final questions.
Yeah, I appreciate this is the early days. This is very at the start of things, and that's good. I think it's good that you're coming to the Angling Trust at the beginning. Oh, by the way, add black bream to your list. It's another very important species. Yeah, it's going to be difficult, but there are people about like Gilby very good. Good idea to contact a specialist. And we only got 2 magazines really. We've got Sea Angler for recreational, and Fishing News for the commercial trade. And you're going to hit a lot of resistance because everybody thinks, what's your angle? What you're up to? What are you going to ban? What are you going to control? What are you going to stop us from doing? And it's breaking those bits down you can find most interesting, I think, along the way. But most anglers want to help and want to make it better. So we're all really on the same side because we all want more fish, better fish, bigger fish, and that's the thing. The big threat to us is overfishing from super trawlers primarily, in my opinion. But yeah, so keep plugging away and good luck. And it's been interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting myself there. Thanks, Tony. Andy, the floor is yours if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I realised when we looked at this, it was Demersal, not pelagic, but when I look at the way the MMO and the organisations group fish together, they often group grey mullet species with red mullet, which is very much mixed up and not very helpful. So I thought I'd join just to see what it was about, because I couldn't get clarification, but I haven't. But I do think with my comments, there are species such as flounder, which have been mentioned in the comments, grey mullet, there's gilthead bream, bass species that are hugely important to recreational anglers. They're not getting a mention at the moment. And when I was at previous meetings in DEFRA, they did say that they would be doing this. They would be having meetings about fish that are of particular interest to recreational anglers. I don't see that happening. I don't see that happening here yet. And that needs to happen, regardless of whether they're commercial or demersal, pelagic, or whatever. They're very important to recreational anglers and their fishing. And there needs to be a specific plan for those species. That needs to be fed back. DEFRA have said they were going to do it, but I don't see that having happened.
Great, thanks. Yeah, we can pass that on to DEFRA, and if you've got any particular species, like I think there were lots of obviously that you mentioned, but if there's yeah, some more in there, so gilthead, I think you mentioned that as well, Andy. So if there's some particular species that you think should be there, that we can then bring back to DEFRA to ask them what they're kind of going to be doing it. Some of them might be already included in other FMPs, others might kind of not have made the list yet, but DEFRA are kind of not saying that the species which are currently in the JFS are fixed. It might be that over time, if it's kind of seemed necessary, that other species might be brought in. So I think it's just worth keep telling DEFRA, keep telling us what's important. And yeah, I think RAS have their own FMP, but I could put in the chat a link to the draft JFS as well if you're interested and haven't yet seen what the list of the different FMPs are. And there's also in there a little bit of rationale of kind of why those species were kind of chosen in the JFS as well. And the final JFS is planned to be published in November time as well. So they kind of have done a consultation on the draft and at the moment are analysing responses.
Excellent. Thank you. Do we have time just for John's question?
Yeah, go on.
Okay, excellent. Please unmute yourself, John, and the floor is yours.
I've done it this time. As a recreational angler, I've been an MMO appointee and worked on the IFCA. I retired about 18 months ago, but that's background. One question I don't know, all the fish that are used for pot bait, does the MMO have records of the catches of those fish and what's being used? So several of those species, the wrasse, the dogfish, etc., are used for pot bait every day of the week. Is there any records submitted to the MMO?
I think if there are landings, I think it does depend partly if I'm remembering correctly, that they need to kind of submit as part of the landings if they're over a certain tonnage. If not, then it might not necessarily get caught in the same way. But there might be other ways, like for example, the Catch app that kind of are recording this now. So it's something that we can definitely kind of look into the ins and the outs of it. But I think there are kind of landings data.
Yeah, because that's, for some of those species, every day of the week pots go down and they're all full of bait. And
Yeah.
those species, some of those species make up a big portion of it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Thank you.
We'll just pass on. We've just got one slide just to say thank you very much before we hand back to Stuart. For those who kind of couldn't make the session today, or if you would actually just like to add more information in, we are planning to kind of send out a survey which has those questions that we've asked today. Just if you wanted to provide us with any more information or maybe share it with others who couldn't join today. And also if you are interested in signing up to our mailing list, or if you want to contact us with more questions or more thoughts, then you can also email us at fmp@marinemanagement.org.uk, and then we can add you to the list, stakeholder list if interested, or obviously answer any of your questions as well.
Okay, thank you, Jessica, and thanks Rachel, and thanks everybody. I thought it was a really interesting discussion. As everybody said, I hope it's the beginning of an ongoing and continued discussion around this FMP issue, and of course from the Angling Trust point of view, all the other FMPs that recreational fishers are interested in. So as I mentioned earlier, we've been recording this session and we will be posting it on our website, and we'll let you know when it is available. So if anybody you know who couldn't make it this evening wants to see it, they'll perfectly be able to watch it on our website. Nevin will also be sending out the questionnaire and follow-up to gauge how well you found the session this evening. That really helps us to improve these sessions. It's also an opportunity for you to tell us what you want to talk about in the future. So it will be great if you can fill that in and return that. And then finally, we're taking a break. So we won't be doing a virtual sea angling forum during August, but we will be back in September. And I think, if I'm right, we're returning to mullet in September, and we're going to be looking at aspects of fly fishing for mullet at our September forum. So without any further ado, thanks everybody and have a great evening. I don't know if you're going to watch the Commonwealth Games or the cricket or whatever you're going to choose to do this evening, but have a good one. Okay, bye.